My daughter insisted I pay for her $9,000 wedding gown or forget about walking her down the aisle. I smiled and ignored her, thinking she was joking. When I got to the gate on the wedding day, the security didn't allow me in. What happened next was rather unbelievable. I will tell you everything. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Russell Gray from Birmingham. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. I've always believed there's no greater investment than family. Not stocks, not land, not even legacy. When I built my company from the ground up, sleepless nights, missed anniversaries, sacrifices stacked like bricks, I did it with one thing in mind: to give my daughter, Rachel, a life I never had. She was born during my second year in business, back when I was still renting an office above a laundromat and eating dinner from vending machines. Her mother left 6 months later, too overwhelmed by the grind of being married to a man chasing dreams instead of paychecks. So it was just me and Rachel, father and daughter, against the world. I swore I'd protect her, provide for her, and make sure no door was ever closed to her the way they had been to me. When she was little, Rachel was all curls and questions. Curious about everything, fiercely affectionate. I still remember how she used to sit in my office chair and call herself CEO Junior, demanding snacks like a pint-sized tyrant. I spoiled her, I'll admit that. Dance lessons, private school, designer clothes when she barely understood the labels. I told myself I was just giving her what I never had. But somewhere between her teenage years and college, something shifted. Her demands stopped sounding cute and started sounding entitled. The gratitude that once lit up her eyes got replaced by expectation. And the love? It became transactional. I didn't see it clearly at first. I thought maybe it was just growing pains. But over time, it became impossible to ignore. Rachel no longer saw me as a father. I was a wallet with a last name. When she announced her engagement to Caleb, a man I had only met twice, once at a birthday dinner where he barely looked me in the eye, and once during a business event where he clearly had more interest in my company than in my daughter, I kept my concerns to myself. Rachel was glowing, giddy, and after years of distance between us, I thought maybe this wedding would bring us closer. I offered to pay for the venue, the catering, and even bought them a house under my real estate holdings. I handed her the keys with a smile. "Start your life strong," I said. She hugged me then, tight, sincere. For a moment, I thought the old Rachel was still in there somewhere. But 3 weeks before the wedding, she invited me to lunch at an upscale bistro uptown. The kind with minimalist decor and $14 sparkling water. She barely touched her salad. Her tone was clipped, businesslike. She said, "Dad, I found the perfect gown. It's exactly what I dreamed of since I was a little girl." I smiled. "That's wonderful, honey." Then came the sting. "It's $9,000. I need you to pay for it. If you can't, I'll have to ask someone else to walk me down the aisle." At first, I laughed. I genuinely thought she was joking. $9,000 for a dress she'd wear once. And to tie that to whether I'd walk her down the aisle? It was absurd. But her expression didn't change. Her fork hovered midair. She was serious. Dead serious. My smile faded, replaced by something quieter. I said, "Rachel, are you threatening me?" She rolled her eyes and said it wasn't a threat, it was a boundary. A word people like her toss around like candy when they're trying to justify cruelty. "This is my special day," she added, "and I won't be made to feel like I'm settling." I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice or remind her of all I'd done. I simply nodded, paid the bill, and walked her to her car. I told her I loved her, and I meant it. But something settled inside me that day. A quiet awareness that our relationship had crossed a line. I thought about it the whole drive home. About how far she had drifted from the little girl who once made me macaroni art that said "best dad ever." About how money had infected everything. And about how maybe I was to blame for giving her too much without asking for enough in return. In the following days, I tried to make peace with it. Maybe she was stressed. Weddings are emotional, and Rachel was always a perfectionist. I told myself she'd come around, that the gown would be bought, the aisle would be walked, and all this would be forgotten beneath the glow of fairy lights and floral arrangements. I kept my tuxedo ready. I even practiced what I'd say when I gave her away. She's always been my pride, my light, my compass. It was true, despite everything. I wanted to believe she still saw me that way too. I didn't bring up the dress again. I didn't ask if she'd found another sponsor. I just stayed quiet and waited. The week before the wedding, I sent her a heartfelt card. No check, no pressure, just words. I told her how proud I was, how I hoped her marriage brought her joy and strength, and how I couldn't wait to see her walk down the aisle in whatever dress she chose. I told myself that love didn't need to be bought, that maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to remind her who I was to her. But deep down, I knew better. The morning of the wedding, I woke up earlier than usual. My alarm hadn't gone off yet, but I couldn't sleep, not out of excitement, but something heavier. There was a tightness in my chest, like I was bracing for something I couldn't name. I went through the motions anyway. Showered, shaved, put on the tuxedo I had tailored just 2 weeks earlier. It still smelled like dry cleaning fluid and starch. I looked in the mirror, adjusting the bow tie Rachel picked out years ago for some banquet we attended together. Back then, she called me her king. This morning, I stared at my reflection and felt more like a ghost pretending to belong in someone else's story. I arrived at the venue 20 minutes early, a quiet estate just outside the city with sprawling gardens and white marble fountains. It was beautiful. She had picked well. I parked a little away from the valet station. I've never been one to make an entrance. As I walked toward the gate, I noticed the buzz of guests arriving, laughter, champagne glasses clinking already. But something gnawed at me. I didn't see anyone I recognized. No cousins. No mutual friends. No family. It was as if the wedding had been built in a world where I didn't exist. Still, I pressed forward, nodding at the security guard stationed at the iron gate. He didn't nod back. Instead, he stepped forward, holding up a small tablet and looking me up and down like I was someone trying to crash a gala. "Name?" he asked. His tone was flat. "Bored." I blinked. "I'm Rachel's father. I'm here to walk her down the aisle." The guard furrowed his brow, checked the tablet again, then glanced at the small earpiece in his ear. He pressed it, said something under his breath, then looked back at me with a kind of awkward stiffness. "Sir, you're not on the guest list. Ms. Rachel said specifically that you're not to be let in. If you'd like, you're welcome to wait outside the gate." For a moment, I didn't move. I thought maybe I'd misheard. Maybe there was a glitch, a mistake, a last-minute oversight. But the look on his face, the kind of look people wear when they've done this before, told me this was intentional. I opened my mouth, then closed it. What was I supposed to say? That I bought her first pair of shoes? That I taught her how to swim? That I paid for her college education, her car, the roof over her head? None of that mattered now. She hadn't just uninvited me. She had erased me. My hands trembled slightly as I turned around and walked back to the car. I didn't argue, didn't call her, didn't demand an explanation. I sat in the driver's seat for a long while, staring at the floral archway visible from the parking lot, wondering if I was doing the right thing by leaving. My chest felt hollow, like someone had scooped out the center of me with an ice cream scoop. I had always imagined this moment, walking her down the aisle, handing her off with a proud smile, whispering in her ear, "You've got this, baby girl." Instead, I sat alone in a car, listening to the faint music of a string quartet playing in the distance. The windows were cracked open, just enough to let the sound of other people's joy drift in like salt on a wound. I watched the guests stroll in, perfectly dressed, not a care in the world. Somewhere inside, Rachel was probably adjusting her dress, getting her makeup touched up, laughing with her bridesmaids. Maybe Caleb was fixing his tie, nervous about vows. And me? I was just a man in a black suit parked outside the life he helped build, but wasn't welcome to witness. It was like watching your own family portrait get repainted, only this time you weren't in it. Just the frame, just the silence. I started the engine and drove off without looking back. I didn't cry. That would come later. Right now, there was only a cold, deliberate stillness. It was the same feeling I had the day my own father kicked me out at 17. That same emptiness, that realization that love doesn't always mean belonging. And the worst part? I wasn't even angry. I was numb. The kind of numb that comes after too many chances, too many warnings, too many ignored signs. Rachel had made her decision. Now, it was my turn to make mine. By the time I got home, I had already decided what I was going to do. No rage, no revenge, just balance. Rachel wasn't just my daughter. She was also the CEO of one of my subsidiary companies, a position she held more out of inheritance than experience. Caleb, her new husband, worked comfortably in our logistics division, a job I'd handed him as a gesture of family support. They lived in a 3-bedroom townhouse in Westwood, fully furnished, rent-free, deed still in my name. I built their world brick by brick. And if they could uninvite me from one day, I could uninvite them from the rest. I didn't wait until Monday. I made the calls that night. I've never been one for theatrics. I didn't need a dramatic showdown or some viral moment to prove a point. My world has always been built on discipline, not noise. Decisions made in boardrooms, not in the heat of emotional chaos. So when I got home that night, removed the tuxedo jacket I never got to wear down the aisle, and poured myself a glass of scotch, I wasn't driven by rage. I was driven by clarity. She had locked the gate. She had removed me from her day, her memory, her stage. I wasn't going to cry about it anymore. I was going to respond the only way I knew how, with action. And not because I was vengeful, but because I had finally, undeniably learned that love without respect is just manipulation with a prettier name. The first call I made was to my legal counsel, Cynthia, who had worked with me for over 2 decades and knew how to keep her voice steady even when mine shook. I told her, Rachel is no longer CEO of the holdings group. Effective immediately, she paused for just a moment, the silence saying more than any protest could. Understood, she said, and started the process without asking a single follow-up. Cynthia had been there the day I signed the company over to Rachel 5 years ago. She had been skeptical then. She saw Rachel's impatience, her lack of real experience, but I was blinded by fatherhood. I thought giving her the title would make her grow into the responsibility. Instead, it made her entitled. And now, I was done confusing inheritance with earned trust. By the time I hung up, I already felt something shift in my chest. Not relief, not guilt, but something close to resolution. The next call went to HR. Caleb's employment would be terminated. Not because he married my daughter, but because he was never qualified to begin with. I had created a position for him, padded with benefits, and told myself it was family support. But the truth? It was nepotism, plain and simple. And I wasn't going to keep watering a tree that bore only bitter fruit. I didn't elaborate to the director. I just said, let him go by Friday. Severance according to contract. No drama. No explanation. Then I called Brian, my real estate manager. The townhouse they lived in, 3B on Rosefield Lane, had been a wedding gift, in spirit if not on paper. It was still listed under one of my trusts. I had paid the taxes, the HOA, even the utilities for the past 6 months while they prepared for the wedding. I told Brian to have it listed by the end of the week. He asked if the tenants were vacating. They will, I said, my voice steady. If not voluntarily, we have the clause for early termination. Brian didn't push back. He just sighed and said, understood, sir. I wasn't worried about the legal logistics. Everything was airtight. They had signed without reading. And I had written it to protect them from themselves, never thinking I'd use it for this. I finished the night by sitting in my den, the one room in the house that still felt untouched by Rachel's absence. There were old photos on the shelf. Her at age 5, standing proudly with a science fair ribbon. Her at 15, in braces and a piano recital dress. Her at 21, drunk on champagne at her college graduation. I didn't take them down. I didn't smash anything. I just looked at them and felt the slow unraveling of fatherhood in my chest. This wasn't revenge. This was me setting the table straight after watching it tilt for far too long. I had paid the price of love and silence for years. This was just the receipt. 3 days passed before the first ripple hit the surface. I didn't hear from Rachel directly at first. Instead, my assistant mentioned that someone had been calling the front office repeatedly, leaving messages asking for me to please just pick up. I knew who it was. She hadn't called my cell. Maybe she was too ashamed. Or maybe she thought if she went through my company first, it would sound more professional, less personal. But there was no professionalism left between us. Just wounds and paper trails. When she finally did call me directly, it was mid-afternoon. I was in the middle of reviewing quarterly reports when the screen lit up with her name. For a moment, my thumb hovered over the green button. I didn't want to hear excuses. I didn't want apologies. But something in me, perhaps the sliver of the man who used to kiss her forehead goodnight and check under her bed for monsters, answered. Her voice was quiet. Raw. Dad, please don't hang up. I didn't say anything. Just waited. I didn't know they took you off the list, she said quickly, the words tumbling over each other. It was a mistake. The planner. Caleb, something got messed up. I didn't mean to. I thought you were running late. I let her talk. Let her twist the narrative. Let her try to patch a wound with threads made of lies or panic or maybe, just maybe, guilt. When she paused, I finally spoke. You said you'd find someone else to walk you down the aisle if I didn't pay for a $9,000 gown. I didn't. So you did. That wasn't a mistake, Rachel. That was a choice. There was silence on the line. Then the quiet sound of her sobbing. I messed up, okay? She whispered. Please don't do this. Caleb lost his job. We're getting eviction notices. I don't know where we're going to go. I just wanted the day to be perfect. I didn't think. That's the problem. I said, not harshly, just firmly. You didn't think. You never think, because you've never had to. I've always cleaned up the messes, paid the bills, opened the doors, and you stood there, waiting with open hands, never once wondering what it cost me. But I'm your daughter. You were, I said, my voice breaking in a way I hadn't expected. But that day, you made me a stranger. I didn't yell. I didn't hang up. I just let the silence say what words couldn't. The first voicemail came at midnight. I was half awake, lying in bed with the TV humming in the background, the volume turned low, more for company than distraction. I heard the phone buzz on the nightstand and didn't reach for it right away. By the time I grabbed it, she had already hung up. One missed call from Rachel. One new voicemail. I stared at it for a moment, thumb hovering, unsure if I even wanted to know what she had to say when she thought I wouldn't answer. Eventually, curiosity outweighed caution. I pressed play and held the phone to my ear. Her voice cracked before she even got 3 words out. Dad, I don't know what to say. A pause, long and trembling. I know I messed up. I know you're angry. You have every right to be. But I'm begging you, please don't shut me out like this. We didn't mean to hurt you. It was just, everything got so overwhelming with the wedding and Caleb and the planning and another pause, a sniffle, a shaky breath. I didn't mean for you to find out like that. I didn't even know until later that night what had happened. I swear I thought you'd just gotten stuck in traffic or changed your mind. I was looking for you, and when I asked, they said you never came and I just broke down, Dad. I broke down. Please don't do this. I deleted the message without listening to the rest. Not out of cruelty, but because I had heard everything I needed to hear. The excuses, the deflection, the sudden awareness of consequences only now that the safety net had vanished. I didn't want her tears. I didn't want her panic. I wanted something she couldn't give, accountability. Not just regret because life got harder, but real, grounded ownership of what she had done, not just to me, but to herself. And to hear her say, we didn't mean to hurt you, was like pouring salt in a wound. Of course they meant it. Not in some sinister, premeditated way, but in that casual, entitled way that assumes love comes with no limits and forgiveness is just a matter of waiting out the storm. The next morning, there were 2 more missed calls. One voicemail from Caleb, surprisingly. I hadn't expected him to call. In all our time knowing each other, he rarely spoke to me unless he needed something. A reference, an approval, a signature. I hesitated before playing his message, but eventually did. Mr. Wallace, he began, his voice stiff and overly formal. I just wanted to reach out and apologize personally. I know you're upset, and you have every reason to be. Rachel's been a mess these last few days and I just wanted to say we never intended to disrespect you. The seating arrangements, the guest list stuff, it was miscommunication. We hired this planner, Amanda, and she went rogue on some of the things we told her. We didn't double check. That's on us. I hope we can talk soon. Maybe over lunch. Just to clear the air. I didn't return his call either. I wasn't interested in clearing the air. I was watching them squirm in the very space I had once protected them from, the real world, where decisions carried consequences and relationships, no matter how sacred, could be severed when disrespected too many times. It wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about boundaries. I had given them the world, and in return, they had taught me that generosity without discernment was just a slow path to resentment. So I did the only thing left to do. I moved on. I instructed my financial advisor to begin restructuring the family trust. Rachel's name would remain on the personal beneficiary list, but with a clause that froze all disbursements. She would still be my daughter. I wouldn't disown her, but she would no longer hold the keys to my empire. That week, my sister Janice came over. She had heard about the wedding fiasco through family gossip and came bearing lasagna and questions. "Are you really cutting her off?" she asked as she placed the foil-covered dish on my kitchen counter. "I mean, completely?" I didn't answer right away. I poured us both coffee instead, black for me, with half and half for her. "I'm not cutting her off," I said finally. "I'm cutting her out of what she never earned." Janice frowned, stirring her coffee. "I get it, I do. But don't you think this is extreme? She uninvited me to her wedding, Jan," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "Not a dinner party. Not a brunch. Her wedding. She stood before our entire family, our friends, and made it clear I wasn't welcome. You think a handwritten apology can fix that?" "No," she admitted, "but she's still your daughter, and I'm still her father, which means I have a responsibility to teach her something she's never had to learn. Actions have consequences. Love doesn't mean shielding someone from their own mistakes." Janice nodded slowly. "I just don't want you to end up alone because of this." I looked her square in the eye. I'd rather be alone than disrespected. She didn't argue after that. By the end of the week, Rachel and Caleb had vacated the townhouse. Whether they were forced or left voluntarily, I didn't ask. Brian handled the logistics. The property went back on the market and the keys were returned, untouched. I noticed they didn't leave a note. Not even a post-it. That told me everything I needed to know about where we stood. I wasn't a father they had wronged. I was just a resource they had lost. And once that resource was gone, the silence was louder than any apology. But I slept better than I had in months. It had been 10 days since the wedding, and the phone had finally stopped ringing. The calls, the voicemails, the half-hearted attempts from Caleb's friends or Rachel's cousins to mediate had all gone quiet. I could tell the news had made its way around the family circuit, through text chains, side conversations, maybe even a few Facebook posts wrapped in vague statuses like, "People show you who they really are when money disappears." I didn't care. Let them talk. Let them guess. I wasn't going to dignify betrayal with an explanation. They hadn't seen me outside that gate. They hadn't stood in the heat wearing a rented tuxedo while strangers passed by, whispering and watching me like I was some sad, lost man who'd wandered into someone else's life. And maybe I was. Maybe I had been lost in an illusion, believing that family meant something more than blood and last names. But now, I was found in the fire. Clarity had replaced comfort, and I was standing firm in that. Rachel's fourth voicemail came on a Wednesday. Her voice had lost its earlier gloss of panic and was now coated in something quieter, something that sounded like realization. "I know I can't fix it," she said softly. "I know sorry isn't enough. I just want to see you. Please, Dad. We don't have to talk about the company or the house. Just you and me." I didn't erase that one right away. I let it sit in my inbox. Not because I intended to respond, but because I wanted to remember that moment, when entitlement cracked just enough for sincerity to leak through. Maybe it was real. Maybe it was just desperation disguised as humility. I didn't know, but it was something. The following Saturday, I got a call from the building manager at one of my newer complexes downtown. "Sir," he said, "I think you should know. Rachel and Caleb showed up today. They were asking about units. Said they were looking for something affordable." I didn't say anything, of course. Just thought you'd want to know. I thanked him and hung up. For a moment, I sat at my desk, hands clasped together, imagining them walking through that lobby, so different from the one they had just been evicted from. Smaller, simpler, no concierge, no rooftop access, no marble floors. Just walls and a ceiling and a reminder that the comfort they'd taken for granted had always been a gift. And that gift had come with a heartbeat. I didn't reach out. I didn't intervene. They'd asked to be treated like adults, to make their own decisions, live their own lives. So I let them. If they wanted independence, they'd have it, completely. No more safety nets. No more lifelines. Just the life they said they were ready for. My only hope was that they'd learn something in the fall that they never bothered to learn while perched in the nest. 3 days later, Rachel showed up at my office. I was in the middle of a board meeting when my assistant knocked gently and said, "Sir, your daughter is here. She doesn't have an appointment, but she said it's urgent." The room went still. A few of my partners glanced at each other, unsure if they should look away or lean in. I stood slowly, buttoned my suit jacket, and said, "We'll take a recess." I stepped into the hallway and saw her standing there, shoulders hunched, arms wrapped around herself like she was bracing for a storm. Her makeup was minimal, her hair pulled back, her eyes puffy and red. Not the polished version of Rachel I was used to seeing. This was someone raw, someone stripped. "Dad," she said, her voice small. "Please, can we talk?" I gestured toward the conference room across the hall. Empty, quiet. She followed me in, and we sat across from each other at the long table. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Just silence, heavy and electric. "I know I hurt you," she said finally. "I know what I did was beyond selfish. And I'm not here to ask for anything. Not money. Not the job. Not the house. I just want you to hear me." I nodded. "Go on." She took a deep breath. "I wanted the wedding to be perfect. I got caught up in it. The pressure, the expectations. And when you wouldn't pay for the gown, I felt rejected. Like you didn't believe in my dream. But that wasn't fair. I see that now. You've always been there. You've always provided. And I treated you like an option instead of the man who raised me. I was wrong. I was so wrong." Her voice broke at the end, and she wiped at her eyes. I watched her, not with anger, but with a kind of grief that doesn't burn anymore, just aches. A quiet, dull ache. "I forgive you," I said, and she looked up quickly, hope flickering in her gaze. "But forgiveness doesn't mean things go back to the way they were." She nodded. "I know. You're still my daughter," I continued. "But the access you had, to my business, to my assets, that's gone. Not out of punishment. Out of principle. You made your choice. And now I'm making mine." She swallowed hard. "So what happens now?" "Now," I said, "we rebuild. Slowly. As two people learning how to respect each other again. No titles. No contracts. Just us." Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she smiled through them. "That's all I want." We sat there a while longer, talking, not as CEO and former employee, not as landlord and tenant, but as father and daughter, two people who had finally stepped out of the shadow of money and ego to face each other fully. I wasn't naive. I knew this didn't fix everything, but it was a start. And sometimes, the hardest part isn't the fall. It's standing up afterward without reaching for what's familiar. Without going back. 3 months passed before I visited the wedding venue again. It wasn't planned. I had been driving through that part of town for a property inspection and saw the familiar wrought iron gates from the road. The same gates I had once stood outside of, ignored and uninvited, while the daughter I raised walked into a future without me by her side. I pulled over and parked across the street, engine still running. The venue looked different now. Not physically. Its marble columns and manicured gardens still gleamed in the late afternoon sun, but emotionally. It no longer carried the sting of rejection. It had become a monument, not of pain, but of the turning point. The moment I stopped confusing unconditional love with unlimited tolerance. I sat in the car, watching a couple pose for engagement photos by the fountain. They were laughing, touching noses, completely absorbed in each other's joy. I used to think that's what I was building for Rachel. An empire so big, so safe, that she'd never have to worry. But in my effort to give her everything, I failed to teach her the weight of those gifts. I let love become currency, until eventually, I was just a line item in her life, valuable only when she needed something. That day at the gate made me see it clearly. That was the day I understood that boundaries are not barriers. They are bridges to respect. And if someone refuses to cross that bridge, you don't tear it down. You just stop waiting at the other end. Since our meeting in my office, Rachel and I had kept in touch, but cautiously. We met for coffee once a week at a little cafe neither of us had ties to, neutral ground. The conversation started off stiff, full of silences and half-finished apologies. But slowly, they softened. She began asking me about my life, not the business, but me. how I slept, whether I still painted on weekends, if I had ever considered retiring and traveling. Real questions. Human questions. And I asked her about her new job. She had taken a marketing assistant position at a mid-sized firm, working under someone who had no idea she used to run a company with her last name on the door. She didn't complain. She didn't act above it. For the first time in her life, she was earning without expecting, building without borrowing. That was progress. Still, I kept the lines clear. She didn't get reinstated in the trust. The house remained rented out. Caleb, from what I'd heard, had taken a warehouse supervisor position 2 towns over. I didn't ask for details. Whatever he was learning now, he needed to learn it without my influence. My generosity had once been their crutch. Now it was their absence that had become the real teacher. And that was a lesson money could never buy. I turned off the engine and stepped out of the car. I didn't walk to the gate. I just stood on the curb, looking. The air smelled like gardenia and fresh soil, like the memory of a promise I had once made. To protect, to provide, to always be there. I hadn't broken that promise. I had simply rewritten its terms. You don't stop being a father when your child disappoints you. You stop being a doormat. There's a difference. As I stood there, I remembered the speech I had written in my head for her wedding. I never got to say it, but I had rehearsed it countless times in the mirror. Rachel, you are my greatest joy and my proudest achievement, not because of what you do, but because of who you are. Today, I hand you over not just to a husband, but to the world. Be kind. Be strong. Be better than me. I realized, standing on that sidewalk, that the speech wasn't wasted. It just needed a different ending. One where I handed her not to someone else, but to herself. Fully. Without cushioning. Without shields. When I got back in the car, I didn't feel heavy. I felt light. Not because everything was fixed, but because I had finally let go of what I couldn't carry anymore. The guilt. The need to fix. The illusion that love alone could cure entitlement. I had forgiven her. And I had forgiven myself. For enabling, for overlooking, for waiting too long to set the necessary boundaries. The past didn't own me anymore. I own my peace now. Later that night, Rachel sent me a photo over text. It was of a modest 2-bedroom apartment. Plain furniture, secondhand rug, a chipped coffee table. But it was theirs. Home, she wrote, followed by a little heart. I stared at that message for a long time. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I opened the photo again and looked closer, not at the furniture, but at the feeling behind it. It wasn't wealth. It wasn't opulence. It was pride. Earned, not given. I typed back, I'm proud of you. Keep going. She replied, thanks, Dad. I will. And that was enough. If you've ever had to choose peace over people who took your love for granted, I hope this story reminded you that setting boundaries isn't betrayal. It's protection. Drop a comment if you've ever had to walk away to stand tall. And if you stayed to the end, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Your story matters. Let them know where your line is. See you soon in the next story.